Everybody's got a story. You just have to listen. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and this is Good Listen. And today, James III tells his story. You know, there's nothing like making somebody laugh. And there's probably nothing better than getting paid to make somebody laugh. James is a super talented actor, writer, and producer known for his work with the legendary sketch comedy group, the Astronomy Club. We're going to talk about his love of comedy, how he made the jump from Akron to New York City, and perform at the legendary Upright Citizens Brigade Theater, and what it's like to make a career in comedy. James, how are you?
I am well. How are you? It's good to see you.
Good to see you, James. And I kind of want to start by talking about the first comedic memory you have. And
Wow.
I'm going to take you back to mine. So mine was, and I was just thinking about this before we started, was Who Shot Buckwheat on Saturday Night Live, when the SNL had this running gag for weeks. And I think I looked it up. It's like, it was 40 years ago. That's how long. So I'm showing my age
Wow.
here. But it was this running gag where obviously people know Eddie Murphy played Buckwheat famously, but they wanted to kill the character. And this was post, like, Who Shot JR. They did this running bit. And SNL never does this. They still don't do it. Whereas a running bit that ran like for multiple weeks on the show with like short films. They find out who the killer was and they talk about the killer. And to me, that is like the first time as a child, was like, this is so effing funny. Like this, like I still remember to this day, like watching it play out, because it was like unlike anything we've ever seen before. Because I watched SNL and then all of a sudden, wait, there's a narrative. I guess as a kid, I don't think this, but wait, there's a narrative running from week to week. This is so weird. What are you doing here? So do you have a memory like that sticks out from your early childhood?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is the first memory, but a pretty early one is there's this episode of the Dick Van Dyke Show. I used to love watching Nick at Night. And there's this episode of the Dick Van Dyke Show called The Return of Happy Spangler. And essentially what happens in it is a guy who's from, it's not necessarily vaudeville, but he's not used to, he doesn't do radio, and he doesn't do their live show, or maybe he does radio. He's like used to radio or used to vaudeville or something. And he comes on and guest writes for the Alan Brady show with Dick Van Dyke and everybody. And he doesn't write a single thing for the whole week. And Dick's like, what? I thought you were Rob. Is like, why? I thought you were, you're the greatest. Like, why aren't you writing anything down? And he's like, because you can't fall down anymore. You can't, people don't. It's not PC. He's literally like, it's not PC to have a pratfall and like hurt yourself anymore. And so then Dick like writes a whole monologue where he does a lecture on comedy. And he's like, today's comedy doesn't, you can't fall down or hurt your foot. And while he's talking about this, he's doing all of the things that you can't do. Like he gets his tie stuck in the desk, and he like bangs his head on the desk, and he's like, oh, and he like gets up to leave, and he gets stuck in the garbage can and like trips over and it's just like this hilarious thing talking about the state of comedy while he's also being like a hilarious slapstick buffoon. And I have always I aspire to that. I still to this day aspire to something as funny as that bit. And it's at the end of that episode. The episode ends with this hilarious bit.
Oh, that's so great. That's awesome. I'm I never got a Dick Van Dyke as a kid. I was always like in the 80s for whatever reason, it didn't run that much. So I remember I was just like a Brady Bunch and Gilligan's Island kid. But it's so funny you talk about the current state of comedy, because one of my pet peeves nowadays is you can't do that anymore. Oh, you can't make that movie anymore. Like, it drives me crazy, and because it's like, yeah, there's a lot of things that change that you don't do anymore. The movies from the 70s were way different from the movies in the 40s. So you can have said, boy, you can't do The Godfather in 1940. Yeah, no shit, because they didn't have that perspective. So what is your take on that? Because I know a lot of it, especially in comedy, this comes up. I'm a huge Mel Brooks guy, and a lot of his comedies come up in this conversation. Can't do Blazing Saddles anymore. What's your take on that thought process?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said is absolutely right. Like, comedy evolves, and there are just certain things that, and evolves with the times, right? There are certain things that just aren't funny, anymore. They literally don't make someone laugh anymore. It starts to make people, the mass consciousness feel differently than the mass consciousness felt at the time,
Right.
when these things were funny. Obviously there were people at those times that also found them offensive then, like,
Right.
but it's when we all catch up to that, is when, comedy starts to evolve. And I think, I think that it is like, it's what I love about that bit that I just mentioned, is that that bit turned what that comedian who thought this was passe and you couldn't do anymore on its head, turned it on its head, and so there are ways to be smart about comedy instead of like just, punching down or just doing what, like you can, if are if you are funny, and if you, know what you are trying to say and trying to reach people, I think that you can do that, and if you only rely on, like, I just want to be able to call people X, Y, and Z, it's like, well, maybe you're not, maybe you're not cut for this.
Right. Yeah, it's so funny. So you and I ran in similar circles at UCB in New York City. You were obviously way better than I was, more
You
successful at it.
can't.
I mean, I took the classes, putzed around on like the weeknight shows and stuff like that. But I want to talk about your love of sketch comedy because that's basically your bag, your specialty, so to speak. And I was curious because you're from Ohio originally,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how tell me about your upbringing in terms of like falling in love with sketch comedy. So for me, I mentioned at the top, SNL was like my interest to sketch comedy. I went to
Yeah.
UCB for improv. I realized I suck at improv because I'm way too in my head. I'm thinking about funny things to say. I couldn't do it, but loved actually executing sketch comedy, working
Yeah.
in collaboration with people. How did you fall in love with sketch?
Yeah. In Ohio, and in Akron, that's where I'm from. There were a couple performing arts schools. So I was in a performing arts middle school, and then also went to a performing arts high school. And I mean, and maybe even a little bit before that, I was like always like doing voices and things, and trying to do like impressions of cartoon characters. But I think specifically sketch comedy um, became a thing for me in middle school. I did a Commedia dell'arte. We had a Commedia dell'arte troupe, and so that basically what we did was we did like a series of like structured improvisations that we would then write down, and then perform those, and so like that was kind of the early sketch that I got to do. I remember watching, this is not sketch, but I remember watching a lot of like Whose Line Is It Anyway, as like sort of being the early like group comedy influences. And then like, I mean, I loved Mad TV. I didn't watch SNL as much. I loved Mad TV. And all that on Nickelodeon was big for me. Like I watched I still have VHS recordings of like all of those episodes. And so and like, in the fact that it was kids doing it too. So those were like my big, like, early sketch influences.
Awesome. And so let's talk about the jump from going from Akron to New York. And if you go and well, I guess UCB is not the same as it used to be, but when I was hanging around UCB, they had an office with rehearsal spaces. It was really,
Yeah.
it was like amazing. It was like a kid in a candy store. But one thing that was pretty common in those days was they all looked like me. There was all just a
Sure.
bunch of white dudes, white girls,
Absolutely.
and then all of a sudden, here comes this goddamn astronomy club. Wait a minute. There's not a bunch of white
What?
guys and
There
white
could be
girls.
black people in it. I didn't
What's
know there could be
going
black people doing improv and sketch comedy.
on? So I was curious, and this is one of these things where one of the reasons I love doing podcasts is because having conversations like this may be awkward in real life. But like, can you tell me like what you were thinking and how you were able to break through it, being so different from everybody else. Because one of the things I remember, Anthony Tamanek, as you probably know, was one of my first teachers of improv, and he always talked about how UCB and in these improv schools was like Scientology. It was it was like
absolutely.
You paid money to be part of the gang, and then the more money you paid, you rose the ranks. And again, when to be part of this is you have to have money. You have to be coming from an affluent society. Oh, it's all this shit that happens in society these days. But then, how do we get diversity of thought when it's everyone looking the same? So if you don't mind going back and telling me about, you walking through those doors for the first time, maybe how the group formed. Can you take me back to those days?
Yeah, well, just going off of that anecdote from Antamanik is that I always say Aunt Tamanik. Tamanik is
it's a weird spelling. No one can ever spell. I don't think he knows how to spell his name. Yeah,
is that I was fortunate enough to get the diversity scholarship for my first couple classes. So I because I do not come from money and had $4 to my name at the time of taking classes, and so where Astronomy Club came from is was that idea. I had auditioned for, I got through all my core curriculum, and I was able to audition for Harold, and I did not get on. And I do not think I didn't get on because of race. That was not how I was looking at it. However, I went to Lloyd night, that first Lloyd night, and the teams came out, and I was and it may have had something to do with the lighting. I was in the back of the house, and just I saw a bunch of shiny white people walk out on stage. Literally, the thought was, look at the gleaming white. It was the lights and stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I was just like, and at the time you could audition as a team. You could come together as a team, and so it was just like, okay, my plan is to audition with a bunch of Black people, and so I had that idea, and reached out to a bunch of people. I was also already playing on a team called Nobody's Token, which a handful of members from Astronomy Club were also in, and I reached out to a bunch of people, and we had a couple practices, and then the team, the 8 of us, started to gel and meet regularly before auditioning the next year, and I think we had maybe 3 or 4 months of regularly practicing together before doing our set. I still remember moments from our audition set. It was a lot of fun, and we were fortunate enough to be put on as a house team. I think we performed on Lloyd night for just a year, and then we had in that time we started doing sketch and we had a Black History Month show that was an hour, and then we cut that down to a half hour, and that ran as a spank. That is what they call the running shows that they have there, and we had that spank for about a year and change. We took it to LA, did it in LA for a couple nights, and it was really great. And from there, we started getting. We were sketch comics to watch, and got to do a sketch series from Comedy Central at Comedy Central. After that, the tape from the Comedy Central show was essentially like a pilot, that we were able to then shop around when we were trying to get our Netflix series made. And so that's a truncated version of everything, but that was the journey, right? That was the journey.
And when you were going through this, I mean, one of the things, your timing was spectacular, because your show on Comedy Central and then you went to Netflix was you were right smack dab in the middle of the streaming wars, where all of a sudden all these companies were like, holy shit, we need content. Comedy's cheap. It's not that expensive. We hire some guys, and you got on Netflix. What was it like doing a show where you guys essentially you had total control? It wasn't like you were doing a network show where you had executives standing outside. Hey, what are they doing there? Was it? That's funny. You were given total control to do this.
Yeah.
And for artists, that's crack. Like, Martin
Yes.
Scorsese's going off on that right now with Apple. Like, Apple's writing him these stupid $200 million checks for movies that like a
Yeah.
small amount of people are going to watch. And he's like, cool. I don't care if no one's going to watch this, but Apple's giving me $200 million to do a historical film about, fucking
Right.
the first FBI murder case. But as a comic, this is just gold, right? What was that
Yeah.
like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the first thing I'll say is I don't know if 8 people could ever have total control. Like there was
True.
we certainly had to filter a few things through the higher ups and whatnot. But to your point, really sort of they did let us run with it, and it was great. It was really awesome. It was a really great experience for all of us to sort of get together, be able to. I mean, I think we wrote something like 100 and change 150 sketches. Like that I might be. I'm not sure if I'm overshooting it at 150 or if like that's the exact number. But we crossed 100 for sure, and we had to narrow that down to 30. But it was really great to kind of figure out what are our voices together in this way, because we had written, we had a couple sketch shows that we had done, but like it wasn't like this, it wasn't like trying to figure out 6 episodes of a series. And so it was just there was so much more ground to cover, and getting able to sort of oversee, we each got to oversee our individual sketches that we wrote. And so being able to, have input in what costume design was, and have input in the casting of whenever we needed to go outside of the group, and all of that was just really, it was truly it was a magical experience at the time,
And I can't even imagine what that must have been like, just to have like a budget. Because I remember, I was in a sketch group for 3 years, and literally the budget was like what we could afford, like what kind of costumes we get from Amazon and then return them because you don't want to be stuck with a costume. That must have been like a kid in the candy store type stuff.
And I'll even say that it was really there were a couple sketches that I got to be a part of. I'm sure other members of Astronomy Club had this experience too. But there are a couple of sketches that I got to be a part of that one of my sketches that I did was Cat Williams teaching Shakespeare to a bunch of kids. And that was like my oldest character. Like I had been doing that since like maybe my second or third year of doing comedy at UCB. And
Wow.
so it was like, I've been sitting with this for so long, and now like there's a classroom full of students, and I'm like decked out like Cat Williams, and I think it was Friday After Next. It was like that outfit that he wore, and it was like to see that fully realized in that way. And then I had the same experience on the Comedy Central show, and I'm sure we all felt this way because we were all in this sketch. But where the George Washington Carver sketch that we used to just do, we were wearing all black because that was our costume for the stage show.
Yeah.
And we would just sit in chairs. We would just sit in chairs wearing all black. To see it in a room that looked like it was straight out of the early or late 1800s America. It was like, what are we? This is crazy. We're all in these costumes. You have a perm hair, dude. It was like, this is crazy to see it, fully realized in that way.
That's so cool. And you kind of yada the length of time you've been together with the Astronomy Club, but I mentioned it was 10 years. Yeah, I mean 10 years you guys that were together. Tell me about the longevity of the group, because in creative collaborations, that's really, really hard. I mean, like I said, my group was 3 years, and I thought that was like a miracle that we lasted 3 years. But tell me about working with people who obviously have different opinions on what's funny. I mean, you guys have a common sense of what works together, but you guys have all different opinions. Tell me about the longevity and how that played out.
I think we had been together at the time of the show. I think we had been together 6-7 years at the time of the show. And I'll say, I think that's the height of the most work we've done together. We still every now and again we'll hop on a show now, but at that time, it's hard. It is hard, to your point, 8 different voices. We had some great, it's great when certain people are able to kind of step up and be leaders. And just to shout them out real quick. Jonathan Braylock, Gerard Milligan, Keisha Zoller. Jonathan and Keisha were head writers for the sketch show that we did. And one of the seasons of I'm not sure if it was both seasons of the Comedy Central show or if it was the second season. We call them seasons. Each sketch was an episode, and there was 2 seasons of the show, six sketches ultimately. And Gerard's big producer minded a person, and just was always kind of spearheading emails and like and connecting us with people and so it was really great. And once we got the show, we were all sort of figuring out how we can, because no one had, we all had equal kind of, we were all co-EPs and writers and create, and so we all sort of figured out how we can step up in these different ways for that show. But I definitely think that like that during our run, it was really great to have like voices like that were sort of able to help kind of streamline, and that we can kind of lean on in that way. And then also like, when we're improvising, the various coaches that came in and I got to shout out Carl Foreman, who was our director on the sketch show that we did at UCB. Voices like that coming in and then now that since I'm shouting out names, Dan Powell at Irony Point operated as I don't think in actual title head writer of the show, but he produced the show and was in the room and was kind of he had the seat at the table, the head seat at the table that we got that kind of helped to filter voices as well. And so yeah, I mean, I figuring out the balance of the team was tough at first, and like and and really I think it's a testament to like, everybody's hard work and dedication to each other, but then particularly those voices that were able to like really step up and lead.
No, that's cool. Was there any a point where there was, and I'm sure there was like moments of fracture or something, but like,
Oh, sure.
how did you get through the pain points? Like, was there one person who stepped in and be like, well, let's cool it off, let's go? Because we've all been there, whether you're doing comedy or you're working in an office, that people working so closely together, you're gonna get on each other's nerves. It's almost like
Yeah.
being in a relationship with a spouse, where like little things will set you off. Who was the person that sort of stepped in and was the fire extinguisher and took care of that?
I mean, there were times when I was that person, but I would say those people that I named were kind of very good about like really good about like sort of even just mediating themselves, like if like if someone's like, well, I need to remove myself from this for a moment, everybody in general was pretty good at that. But I would say that like our fire, the people that put out fires were like, like Jonathan, Keisha, Gerard, like they helped to really kind of put out fires when they came to be. But I don't even know if everybody would say that for themselves, because it's also, I'm super easygoing. so
Right.
so like as someone that's easygoing, sometimes I also like miss when things are, like it's like, oh, who's fighting, um
And you need
but I
people like you, because not
right, yeah.
everybody can be that like on everything, because all of a sudden you guys will be down each other's throat and it'll be just a miserable experience. And that's just the way you handled it. And in
Right.
terms of like what you do as a solo artist, how does that change in terms of like your creativity? Like the fact that, I talked about the fact, when you guys were doing a sketch comedy show and you guys were the ultimate filter. Now when you're the one, how is that different from working with a group?
I heard someone say I want to say it was Ashley Ward, a comedian improviser, who said, um, people spend a lot of time paying attention to when there are no laughs but I would say there might there's typically like one or two like chuckles in those instances, and like try to follow those. you know and that was something that I heard that, and that helped me to really kind of understand, like, I get a lot of flack for the things that I find funny. Like in my working in groups, you have people who are like, that's who don't vibe with you, sometimes. And But I once I heard Ashley say that, it made me realize, like, right, yeah, like I found this funny, which must mean that there's another person on the planet that
Right.
finds that funny. And then potentially out of the 7 billion people there are, you know, there's a corner of the world that finds this, and so that's something that I live by. Like I try to hold on to, like, does it make me laugh?
Yeah.
And if it makes me laugh, then how can I continue to refine this, so that I can reach more people. But like I try not to, like, I don't think, and I say this in my like impressions and characters classes. It's like I don't think anything should ever be thrown away. I don't think you should ever. You can always go back to something and tweak. You can always polish a turd, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it's so funny because that has me thinking about George R. R. Martin has this classic line, and I use it all the time. Is he says, "Art isn't a democracy," and I
Yeah,
think sometimes people don't realize that comedy is a form of art. And like you said, if you find it funny, hopefully someone else finds it funny. But
yeah,
not everybody has to find it funny.
yeah.
How do you thread
Exactly.
that needle?
Yeah, I mean, not well. I'll say not well, but I do. Like I said, I mean, I'm often like on my I do a podcast with Jonathan and Gerard, and we've been doing that since maybe a year or two into Astronomy Club, and it's still going on. And I am often like the butt of jokes because of, like, it's like, because of the types of things that I think are funny, or the types of things that I'm moved by or excited by. It's a movie review podcast, so it's all content driven. um and so, like, but I have come to really just embrace it, like, I guess I thread it by being like, I like, if I like it, then it's good, then it is good. you know and
Uh,
uh and sort of like refusing to back down, kind of
That's
thing.
so cool. And so tell me about what you're doing now. You're obviously still very busy. I follow you on TikTok. You're always spouting about something. But
Yeah.
in terms of like creating stuff, because I feel like that's one of the things that separates humans from animals.
Hmm.
We can create stuff, and now with technology, we don't have to uh, audition for a Lloyd night at a UCB. We don't
Yeah,
have
yeah,
to be part of a network to create. We don't have to do that to even make a living nowadays.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so how are you handling this transition in your point of your career? Because you, like me, were coming up through the time of you needed one person to think you were funny, to put you
Right.
in a show, to cast you in
Mhm.
this thing. But now the control's in your hands. So how are you handling this control of your career?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a lot in many different ways, but say first and foremost is that I am always trying to find a tribe, always looking for, not to say that, like, I'm moving away from my Astronomy Club family or my Black Man Can't Jump family at all, though we still work together in a variety of different ways. But it's, you know for as much as I'm forging my own path, I'm keeping in mind people that I've worked with, and trying to keep, there are things that I can do well, and there are things that I cannot do well, and when it comes to those things, it's important to, have, your collaborators, and have your people around you that can do the fill in those gaps that you can't do. I know nothing about sound production. you know
Right.
I need be I and I a couple years ago started a production company. It's called Rule of Three, and I started with comic books actually, and so that's a whole other network of people that I've started working with. But it's been a great way for me to get these ideas out that have been working on for so long. I had a friend who recently said screenwriters are the only people who, if you do not get a job or have the means to produce your own work, you don't actually have examples of your work to share, right? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, like of course, you have scripts on scripts on scripts, but it's like, unless people are going to sit down and read your 200-page movie, you know,
Yeah.
then, then, like, then what do you really have to show? And I started with comic books, and I've moved on to producing shorts as well, um and I truly love being where the buck stops, in terms of, like, it's like I I do like that joke, I'm gonna keep it in. I do love that imagery, I'm gonna keep that in, and then sharing it and seeing what the reactions to that is tremendously rewarding.
That's so cool. Didn't you guys do a short that was in Slam Dance a couple of years ago? Was there a
We
short film?
did, yeah.
Yeah.
Gerard uh got us together to do that. It was based off of a script that we wrote. We had a development deal around the same time as Astronomy Club, to write a series for IFC. That, right when it was finally time for it to be considered, was right when, I don't know if IFC is fully gone, but they had like a buying free. They
Yeah.
couldn't
I think they're like Law
produce.
and Order reruns now. Yeah. I think that's all
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
doing. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
s- and so and so it was like they weren't doing anything original anymore. And so we have 8 episodes, um which consists of shorts, and each, there's like 2 11 minutes in each episode. And so we had a bunch of those, and Gerard was like, let's just do one, let's just produce one. And so he, did the work of, like, sort of using his producer mind. This one is the one that is most producible. And we raised funds on Indiegogo, and shot it, and it got into Slam Dance. And that was another example of one of those things where it was like, wow, we wrote this years ago, and we had went through so many hoops, and tried to get it made, we after IFC couldn't do it, we shopped it around to a couple of the and, like, really tried to get it going. And it was just so great to see that fully realized, and it did really well. Like, I talk about it as if it's not my short, because I didn't direct it, and I think about it as, like, Shiraz short, even. So if I start talking about it as if, like, I'm fully removed from it, that's why. That's just
Yeah.
something going on in my head that I can't stop. as a I I co-wrote and co-starred in this, but
I
I,
was going
like,
to say,
feel
yeah,
like
you're in it. Yes. Yeah.
but I just needed to acknowledge that if I start talking about it and
Yeah.
it's as if it's separate. um but it did really well, and I would say surprisingly well. But I don't think, I'm not super. We won a handful of awards and got into a bunch of different festivals, and it was really awesome to see people, this idea that I remember, pitching lines on, and plot points on, in, like, some random conference room, and probably at MTV. Gerard was at MTV at the time, like, probably some MTV conference room, pitched some idea.
That's so cool. And I love what's inspiring about talking to you. And this is one thing that when people ask me about, do I get started in a podcast or get started in a film? Um, I think the big step is actually doing the thing, like the Nike slogan,
Yeah,
just do it.
yeah,
Because a couple years ago, I had an idea for a short film. I had a friend who was a filmmaker. We just self-financed it. We did the same thing you did. We put it, and I'm super proud of it. And the one thing I tell people is,
yeah,
like, I'm not winning any Oscars for it, but you know what? At the end of the day, I made a thing, and it's
yeah,
there. Like, I
yeah,
made a thing. So for folks who are having trouble making the jump of having the idea, because an idea, as you know, don't mean shit unless you do something with it.
Yeah.
Make an idea, like a creative idea, and make it into a reality. Maybe advice for someone, and maybe an advice that you've learned for yourself when it comes to like having a nugget of something and making it into something that's real and tangible. Tell me about those struggles and how you think people can learn from what you've been through.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things I'll say is, you know, I'm someone who picks things apart. So I'm very George Lucas in that way.
Yeah,
Like, something will be done and I'll be like, but is it? But to the point of what you just said is like, n- you cannot take away an idea that you've put out. Like once it's out,
yeah,
and that is worth so much. I just had this thought of like, you that saying, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. The other half of that is like, and the more shots you take, the better at shooting you'll be. And that was something that like that side of it never really sank in for me until recently. That like it's like you go for it, really try and have the pitfalls and like and have the like, "Oh, shoot, we don't have enough money for this, figure out what the budget save is," and and like and but until you do it, there's nothing there. There you don't you we can all say where this is something that I honestly love about it, because what I'm about to say is because being in the industry and like trying to get jobs and trying to do this, that, and the other, you can feel like you're not doing it. You can feel like because you don't have the job, or because you're not making money, or you're not whatever. But the thing that I love about self-producing and and trying to raise funds and doing whatever is that like you 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 can do it when you do it yourself. When you put it out yourself, and you also don't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on these things, right? Like, I mean, I understand there's an element of privilege to even say this, but it's like iPhone cameras are so
yeah.
advanced, and so if you have access to even a cell phone with a good camera, or someone who does, it's like just make whatever you can. You'll be better off for it.
And I was curious about your tinkering phase. With how did you deal with that in the world of improv? Because as you know, on and gone, you can't. Were you one of those people after you got off the stage like, I should have said this one line? Did you
Yeah.
beat yourself up?
I did and still do, and it's why I don't do improv as much anymore. I don't know how closely you follow my social accounts, Joe, but I very publicly quit improv for a year, but kept doing shows during that time because
Right.
I couldn't let it go. It felt like it was like I need to be doing this, but also I can't keep doing this because it is literally killing me to to be like
So
kicking
you're
myself for
living
like
the tortured artist life, James. It sounds like you're the tortured artist. You are so
absolutely.
cliche.
Absolutely. No, but true. And it's like it's so dumb, but I'll be like, why didn't I say this? And I'll think about it for 4 days after the show. And it's like, what is, and I still do. I've been doing improv now in my life for multiple decades. Okay.
Yeah.
and and yeah, it's ridiculous. But
Yeah.
it's
No.
there. It's still
Yeah,
there.
that's why I cannot do improv. I sucked at it too, but also I was my own toughest critic. I'm like, sketch comedy is fun. I could spend like 2 weeks working on a sketch, and then I can make it as perfect as I possibly can. And then I'm
Yeah.
sure with you, James, you probably went back like, all right, it's done, but I wish I could have done this one extra thing or something like that.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So what are you passionate about right now? Let's wrap this up by talking about the future of James the Third, the next decade, the next chapter of the story. What are you
Yeah.
super passionate about outside of the production company? But what else? What else you got going on?
I mean, it is a lot of that, honestly. But also, I mean, I'll just say if we're talking outside of the prod company, I'll just say, I have a 20-month-old daughter, and raising her is fantastic, and she is the the biggest ball of joy and love, and also the most annoying person on planet Earth. And so this is a journey that I'm really excited to be on. And yeah, I mean, I you know I'm excited to continue to create and get work out there. And like I said, I started making shorts. I've been doing some directing. It's hard. It's hard and new to me. And so getting better at either getting better at that, or understanding, my role as a writer producer, and how I can be creative and continue to execute my vision in those ways as well. So I'm super excited about that journey.
That's so cool. And also, by the way, having the kid is great content, as you're probably going to come
Yeah.
to find out. I remember my old boss in my radio days. He was like an older guy, but he had a teenage daughter. So like every day he'd be like, "Hey, did you hear this new song from Jay-Z?" I'm like, "How did you hear that song from Jay-Z?" I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, it's
Right.
because his daughter was listening to it in the car." So just imagine the possibilities, James, of this daughter
Yeah.
of yours. Man, all this content that's coming your way.
Right. Yeah, I'm excited to be young again through her. Absolutely. Or be further reminded at how old I am through her. Either one.
Circle of life, James. And so, for folks who want to keep track of what's going on in your life, what's the best way to do so?
Yes, you can follow me on Instagram at Rule of Three Inc. I have a Kickstarter for my comic book company going on right now through June 9th. So please check that out. You can also go to ruleof3inc.com. And in each case, three is the number three, and ink is INC.
Awesome. James, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And that's today's Good Listen. I'm Joe Pardavila. You can always connect with me on X, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Joe Pardavila, or TikTok at J Pardavila. If you like, you can send me a note at joepardavila@protonmail.com and tell me your story. And lastly, if you can leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, that would be awesome. And if you're watching on YouTube, why don't you give us a big old thumbs up? Thanks for spending some time with me. I'll see you next time. Adios.